Hi, I'm Ricky Graham, and I'm directing and is it stories or tales?
Stories.
Hi, I've done my homework. Hi, I'm Ricky Graham, and I'm the director of And Tell Sad Stories of the Death of Queens.
And I'm Evan Spigelman, and I will be playing the role of Candy.
I feel what's so interesting about this play, and Evan and I have talked about this before, is that it's almost a precursor to Streetcar Named Desire. Written in 1958, it's the only Tennessee Williams play that I think has overtly gay characters. 3 of the 4 characters are gay, and so the leading character, Candy, who is sort of like a prototype of Blanche Dubois, indeed meets this rough trade at a French Quarter bar and brings him home. But I think it's more than just an evening's entertainment. You know, Candy is looking for true love, looking for a husband, for lack of a better word. You know, looking for stability and a reason for living. I think Candy lives for love, and of course,
Absolutely.
as we all know, that can really be a fantasy.
Mm-hmm. And he lives for love, sometimes at the expense of what's right in front of him, which is his community, his neighbors upstairs. Sometimes he shuts that out to a fault. I think also something that is interesting about the being a prototype for A Streetcar Named Desire is that often people say that Tennessee Williams puts himself in his female characters. This is one of the only times where you might see something even closer to Tennessee Williams' lived experience.
Exactly, because Tennessee lived in the quarter, and this play, more than any of Tennessee's plays that take place in New Orleans, you really feel that sense of place. Now, I'm old enough to remember going out and going to bars in the quarter when I was very young, which was in the 60s, which is only about 10 years removed from when the play is set. And all of these characters existed, everything from the rough trade merchant marine to the professional person who had an alter ego living in drag, to the 2 bitchy queens that lived upstairs. Mm-hmm. These are all real people. Another interesting thing about this play is that I think one reason why it wasn't produced at the time is because Tennessee uses great curse words which would never have been allowed on stage, especially like Broadway, and also because it deals so honestly with gay characters.
Right.
It is an interesting point that you brought up. There is that self-loathing of Candy's character, which kind of, the next time you see something like that is in the play The Boys in the Band, which was in the 70s, where the leading gay character enjoys all the perks of being gay, but at the same time, has that sort of self-hatred about it, or lack of a sense of community with his gay friends.
Absolutely, yeah. The neighbors upstairs are sort of the only 2 people who are unapologetically in their own skin.
That's right.
In the play.
That's right, because the other 2 characters, both Candy and Carl, the rough trade, they don't know where they are. They're so confused about maybe not only sexuality, but just where their place is.
Right, and I think that you see communities sometimes form as the language about what those communities are develops. I think that is certainly true within gay communities, that if you go back 200 years, even though you might see a lot of the same behaviors and you might see same-sex couplings and all of this thing, it wouldn't necessarily be known as gay. Mm-hmm. And you hear this in coming out narratives all the time. It's like, well, I didn't know that there was a word for what I was, And so at different points throughout the play, we see Candy being 100% authentically himself. And even though there's the language of queens and drag queens, I agree that I don't know if Candy understands the exact language and the exact sort of categorization. And I think for Candy, it doesn't really matter, except in the lens that Candy wants to have a normal, whatever that means, romantic life,
Exactly.
and wants to have all of the creature comforts that he sees straight couples having. I think as far as surprises, at least for an audience goes, and maybe not as surprising for me, but might be surprising to people going in, is that you could almost transfer this play to present day with almost nothing changed. I think sometimes there is an assumption as people look at queer history that it was sort of completely invisible with nothing going on, and then Stonewall happened, and here we are.
Right.
Whereas the reality is that there have been queer cultures throughout history, and there have been queer cultures in New Orleans for a very long time, some that thrived, for quite some time. And so there is, just like how Tennessee Williams doesn't hide anything in this play, doesn't censor any of the queerness, doesn't censor any of the drag life or anything like that. Neither do the characters. Every now and then there's a allusion to, okay, maybe I do this only, or maybe I only dress in drag on my own, or I don't really go out that much, but people were doing it, even though this specific character might not. And I know people who follow a lot of the same destructive patterns.
Right, but you're saying this does exist today. We know people like this, and that's the thing about the play that is so contemporary for being written in 1958 is, the language. He doesn't pull any punches with the language. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, the two characters upstairs who are, they're gay and they're lovers and they live in the French Quarter and they, and they act gay and they don't try to hide themselves at all.
Yeah.
And that I think is one reason why the play wasn't produced. I mean, apart from it just being a one-act play, is that it was kind of outre for the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that might surprise people how contemporary it is.
Exactly.
The scene with Alvin, played by Chris Jennings, who is also my drag sister, Didi Onassis, who I did not know their non-drag name for the longest time. I was like, I saw the ad in the Arminius program. I was like, wait, are you still doing the play? Did you get recast? And it just sounds like a conversation we would just have about boys and about life and about all that, as far as sort of how living in a drag culture influences preparing for this. It's more about knowing the community, less that, especially because Candy is not a drag performer. It's not going to the clubs in the way that sort of I will. But that sense of community and some of those conversations in this play, I'm like, I know these bitchy queens.
That's
I
right.
know this person,
Absolutely, yeah.
Especially because, Candy, as someone who lives for love, when we meet him, he has just come off of a 17-year relationship. And, I think we all know someone in our lives who defines themselves completely based on their romantic relationships.
Right.
Candy is absolutely one of those people. And so he is extra adrift when we meet him at the beginning of the play.
Right, because that's the only relationship he's ever had. He went from being an adolescent into maybe his first sexual encounter was with this man who became his protector and husband, for lack of a better description.
Right. And so Candy can only locate himself in relation to someone who could be a husband figure, and has never, really, since adolescence, asked himself, well, who am I? What do I care about outside of these things, outside of romantic relationships? So it is left to grasp at straws with someone, Carl, who clearly doesn't care about him, and is clearly in it for other things. But, Candy tries to sort of force that square peg into the round hole.
That's it. And we all know that. Personal experience. I've been in that kind of relationship where
absolutely.
I tried to make that relationship work, make it work, and then it just doesn't. And of course, what we've been working on is how does that eventually affect Candy at the end of the play?
So we had been talking about different sort of classic Hollywood 1950s films that were inspirational and that potentially Candy might model his drag persona after. One of the things that's interesting about Vertigo, even though this is not quite exactly the same kind of inspiration we were talking about, was that in a way there's a reverse Vertigo going on between Candy and Carl, in that way that Candy is trying to mold Carl into Sydney, and even molding Sydney into like the perfect husband that Candy can never really have.
Over the Christmas holidays, when I had time to really look into the play, and I've told Evan this story. I got very, very sick, and I had fever, which I hardly ever get fever, but when I get fever, it always makes me sort of hallucinate. And I was home watching TCM movies because I could barely move, and there was this rash of Lana Turner 1950s movies on, and it was like the heavens opened, and I just saw this whole world of Candy, through the lens of these 1950s Lana Turner melodramas. The look of it, the underscoring music, the over-the-top emotion, the sort of melodramatic plotting is what Candy would be. That would be Candy's meat when she goes to a movie. And this, I think, is part of Candy's emotional makeup and emotional education is American cinema, which we know that Tennessee Williams loved too.
Something that I've been noticing in this conversation right now is the interchanging of pronouns.
Yeah.
I think that I've been using he, him, his. You've been using she, her, hers, and I think something that's interesting about, or I think that I want to highlight for people, because I know it can be confusing for people, or who maybe don't know the terminology. In my perspective, Candy is a drag queen, and Candy has some gender fluidity in terms of presentation, but is not necessarily a trans woman. Right. I think that though there is an interpretation out there that if someone else was doing the play, that could be that. I think from my interpretation of Candy, I am bringing Candy to my lived experience, which is I am a cisgender man who is a cross-dresser, even when I'm not in drag. I mean, you've seen me at the Big Easy Awards with all my gowns on. And I think that in my interpretation, if there was a broader variety of options available to Candy, in that he would be able to just kind of dress up in a gown in day-to-day life, he would do it no sweat, and also in terms of how I think of the character, I go by any pronouns respectful, even though I still consider myself a cisgender man. Mm-hmm. And for most of my friends, that's not confusing at all. Right. I call all my drag sisters she, her, hers, even when they're out of drag, and Right. They do the same for me. But that, this is, at least in this interpretation, in my interpretation, as I read the script, not necessarily the narrative of a trans woman, even though this play might be ripe for that interpretation if a trans actor wanted to pick that up and take it there.
An interesting thing about the play, first of all, it's a little jewel. Tennessee is known so specifically for his great big sprawling epic plays, but some of these smaller little jewel-like plays are so complete, and this one is. So we're able to pack a lot into this short play because we only have 4 actors and we have an amazing design tech staff, and everyone's on the same page about the look and the feel for it. So the exciting thing is that I think we're going to get a lot out of deceptively small theatrical piece. This play is doing a Tennessee Williams play about New Orleans that is performed in New Orleans. New Orleans people love to see New Orleans on stage. Mm-hmm. And to have this very specific microcosm of quarter life at a very specific time is going to be a lot of fun to recreate. But that's just the ground floor. On top of it is this wonderful personalities and Candy's whole spirit and fantasy life on top of it, which I think is perfect Tennessee Williams. You know, the you know, living in fantasy. You know, I can't you know, I can't about a naked light bulb. You know, it's getting through life through your created existence.
Absolutely.